You are watching another episode of Shane Solomon Meets, brought to you by the Cornwall Channel. I'm your host, Shane Solomon, and today I'm super excited. I'm really excited about this. I'm meeting Justin Daish. So here we are. I've watched you on YouTube. You're an absolute superstar, sensation on YouTube. There's so many questions I have for you, Justin. But first of all, welcome to Cornwall.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be back. I can't remember. I came here on a random drive a few months ago just to kind of, clear my head because I love this part of the world, but I haven't had a chance to come here and enjoy it. Hopefully, over the next 24 hours, I might actually get a chance to see a little bit more.
Indeed.
Lovely scenery.
So you've never actually gigged in Cornwall before?
That's a very good question.
This could be like an exclusive for us?
I think you might be right.
Wow.
I think you might be right.
Well, look, for those people who don't know how amazing Justin is, I'm going to insert a clip right now so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, Spitting Image comes to mind. It's unbelievable, uncanny, the quality and the way you portray the wonder that is Hank Marvin. I mean, again, so many questions, but where did it start for you, Justin? Where did the passion, was it the guitar playing came first, then looking up to someone like Hank, or where did it come from?
It's so many years ago, it's a bit blurry, but I know my introduction to music was cassettes in the car with mum and dad. Mm-hmm. So, and the Shadows were one of the sounds which stuck out. We listened to things like Elton John, the Bee Gees, Supertramp, the Lionel Richie, Diana Ross, all sorts. But this clear sound of the guitar really stood out to me, and it made a lot more sense than a lot of the other kind of pop music of the time, kind of the early to mid 90s, when I was still very young. I couldn't understand the words, none of it ever stuck. And then this lovely, sharp, warm, clear guitar just really stood out to me. The Shadows had also recorded Walking in the Air from the Snowman.
That's right, yes, that's right, I remember that.
And so that I had something that I could kind of associate with as a very young kid. And then I just discovered, do you remember those little kind of combined radio and cassette players, little kind of grey plastic rectangular little things? And you'd have all the little play and all the buttons for the cassette on the end. Mm-hmm. We had one of those, and so did my nan, and she had, funny enough, the same tape that I used to play at home as well, which was the Shadows Silver album. Mm-hmm. And I used to play those cassettes to death, and I just loved that sound. And then I was 8 years old, didn't know why we were on the road. I think we'd just finished school, broken up from school that day, December the 22nd, 1995, which was Hank's last show of his 95 tour. And we turned up there, didn't know why we were there. And Mum just kind of saw the poster outside what was then the Colston Hall, now the Bristol Beacon. Mm-hmm. Big poster. It was only a few weeks before Hank had done a guest spot with Cliff. Cliff was headlining the Royal Variety performance. Uh-huh. He'd just sung Had to Be from Heathcliff with Olivia.
Right. That is so weird. I was singing that on the way up here.
Were you?
I swear down.
It's a great song. I love Had to Be. So he sang Had to Be. He brought her on. She came on mid-song as the guest.
I remember
off the, do you?
That's right, I do, yeah.
Whipped off the hood. She looked incredible.
She did.
She is such a loss.
I know. Sad times.
But she went off stage. And then Cliff introduced Hank.
Yes.
And
didn't they do Move It together?
They did Move It together. Because Hank had just recorded an instrumental version for his Hank Plays Cliff album.
That's right.
Where actually Cliff came on, and after the first verse of Hank playing the vocal line as an instrumental, then Cliff guested on the actual album as well and sang the new lyric as well, the new verse that Ian Samwell had just written.
That's right.
To Move It. But it was the first time I think I'd ever heard Hank Marvin, the name Hank Marvin. I'd always known Hank, but I'd never really been aware of or paid much attention.
Sure.
Hank Marvin, and this slightly odd-looking guy with these huge glasses comes up, and this beautiful guitar, this just gleaming, glossy red guitar, and that was it. Then, of course, a few weeks later, complete chance, and Mum and Dad had, by that time, of course, already got tickets to the Bristol show, and I just caught the bug. And as I use as a punchline all the time, there is no known cure for the Shadows bug.
No.
So, not that I would ever want there to be, but
not at all. I mean,
it was great.
I mean, your age, you know, the same with me. You know, I'm a little bit older than you, not a lot, but people say to me, being into Cliff and the Shads, they're like, well, crikey, you know, you stuck in a time warp and all the rest of it. But that music, I mean, bearing in mind, they're still here.
They're still here.
You know, I know a few of them passed away.
Yeah.
But that music is timeless. And it was in those early days.
Yeah.
Long before we were around, you know, it was groundbreaking sounds, wasn't it?
The sound, I mean, I know people, I mean, Colin Price-Jones is the obvious example, if you know Colin.
I know of him, I don't know him.
The Rapiers have been around since, I think, the early 80s, and Colin put them together as his kind of next, he'd been in a group called The Shades up to that point. Then he formed the Rapiers, and they've been through a few personnel changes over the years, but they've been together since the early 80s. And the Rapiers were an incredible kind of, not just Shadows tribute band, but that they did the Shadows, the early period of the Shadows, that kind of classic kind of Young Ones type era, 1961 Shadows. They've done that early period of the Shadows better than anybody ever has. And Colin says about the impact of hearing Apache for the first time. And he probably won't mind me saying, he's always been stuck in that era. He said it to me himself. He's always been stuck in that era. And, I mean, he still wears, you know, horn-rimmed glasses and the winkle pickers. Yeah, and Colin's not the only one. There are so many people out there who have been gripped by that music. And it was just, the beauty of it was Jerry Lordan's compositions. The Shads wrote some of them themselves. They had a lot of great tunes coming from all different directions. But the strength of those melodies had to be really strong, because you didn't have words to carry it. No, it was just the clear guitar, which was that was what was carrying your tune, and you had to write a good tune, otherwise it wouldn't make it as an instrumental. That's
right. I mean, because the Shads had a couple of attempts before Apache stuck, because they were around before. Yeah. Apache wasn't their first attempt, was it? Yeah. It was their first hit.
They hadn't really settled on an instrumental. They'd done a couple of singles as the Drifters. I forget exactly which single it was. Was it Saturday Dance, which I think was the B-side? But they had Feeling Fine, Saturday Dance, vocals, and they had Jet Black and Driftin', no G, Driftin', because they were the Drifters at the time. They were okay, but then Apache and Jerry Lordan introduced them. You know, he played them his tune. Oh yeah, we'd love to record that, and that's
on ukulele. I believe originally they played it to Hank on, I think, the tune or something,
on a Green Line bus. Back of the Green Line bus, he whipped out his ukulele, strummed the chords.
That's right.
I'm pretty much repeating stuff that I've heard from Hank and Bruce in interviews.
Yeah. But I mean, and going back to Colin though, we have a mutual connection, Colin and I. So down here, there's a fantastic rock and roll band called Play It Cool. Okay. Headed up by Tory Wills and his wonderful wife, who kind of looks after the band, keeps them all in check. Called Alison. Beautiful people, and they actually replicated for me a kind of Shadows band when I did a show in Falmouth a few years ago with another good friend of mine, Johnny Cowling. But they always said, I think they know Colin. So, because I remember when I first started singing all the Cliff songs and things like that, I said, you need to go and see the Rapiers and blah, blah, blah. But I never did get to see them live. I've only seen them on YouTube. They still
do play, forgive me, that they do still play kind of occasionally. Yeah. It's obviously... kind of they're not working so much nowadays, but they still do play occasionally. So if you get a chance,
100%.
If you get a chance,
100%.
And it's what I love about the Rapiers with all good bands, and that they aren't necessarily tied to the modern technology and the extra gadgetry that maybe comes along with a show when you're using more equipment. You go to see the Rapiers, and it's a beautiful, clean look. It's a clean stage, apart from the cable from their guitar back to their amp. There's nothing on stage. It's very, very clean, and the suits, the winkle pickers. It is a time warp moment. They're brilliant.
It's fantastic. There's one thing being inspired by hearing a sound such as that wonderful Fender Stratocaster, but it's a whole new thing picking up an instrument and saying, do you know what, I'm going to make this my own as well, and be able to play it just as well, because you can. You're amazing at playing.
Thank you.
So are you self-taught? Where does that come from? Because you couldn't have just gone to Hank and said, listen, can you give me a few lessons, mate?
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I had some lessons at school. So I turned 11. I'd actually, at primary school, I'd shown an interest in playing the trumpet.
So bizarre.
So I'd gone to this first preliminary little, it wasn't even a lesson, it was just kind of an introductory session. And the teacher, I think his name was Mr. Cuthbert, not Mr. Cuthbert. Anyway, forget whatever his name was. He went along the line of all of the students and asked us to sing a little musical phrase back to him to test our ear, how good we were, kind of what our pitch was like. And he landed me with a French horn, which I took home for a week, and which I delighted in making kind of elephant trumpeting sounds out of and all that sort of stuff. But I took it back, and really it was budget. Took it back the next week to him and said, I'm sorry, I can't continue because I want to play guitar. And my parents basically didn't have the money to pay for me to have trumpet lessons at primary school, for me to then become a guitarist. And, do you have more than one type of music lesson going on at a time? So I went to, all that out of the way, I went to secondary school with my first little cheap electric guitar and started having 20-minute lessons there, coming out of lessons to go to a 20-minute guitar lesson. Now, those 20-minute guitar lessons were split between 3 of us.
Okay.
So you've got to learn to tune your guitar. Those introductory lessons, it's all very basic. How do you kind of teach 3 kids anything in 20 minutes? So I would, eventually, I think I ended up paying for the group lessons, but it just happened that I was just by myself and I was able to enjoy it. So, but it was more of a social call. Hi Sean, how are you? Yeah, he became a friend, as more than anything. And I was going home, putting on the CD at that point, learning tunes from the CD by ear, and going back into my guitar lesson to show him what I'd learned myself.
That's ridiculous. Yeah. Okay.
So, and just picking it out. I wasn't great at it. It took years to really get it right.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you play me a new Hank recording, and I find it quite easy. Where's he playing that? Which position on the neck? You can kind of hear his voice sing, and providing I already know the melody anyway, I could pretty much copy it. I'm not going to say replicate it, but providing it's not a strange melody which kind of goes out of kind of the standard shapes that get very frequently used in contemporary music. I can throw together a copy of guitar instrumental quite quickly, especially if it's Hank, because I just know his style inside out.
And how would you sum that up? I mean, Hank is now, the year now as we're recording this is 2022. Hank is probably about 81, 82, I would say.
He's now, I think, just turned 80.
It's very similar to Cliff.
Just turned 81. He's a year younger than Cliff.
Yes. So, Cliff's 82.
Yeah.
So, he's been going a long time. He's, proven, he is an absolute master of his craft. There's no question there. But how would you sum up the man that is Hank Marvin? Apart from someone that's hungry.
Oh God, behave. Hank has a way of expressing melody that nobody's ever really been able to replicate. I do a good job, but all the other great guitarists will say Hank's. Nobody can do what Hank does. He can take a simple melody, and that's the beauty of it. I mean, even now he's playing in Perth, Western Australia. He's got his gypsy jazz group, and they're going out playing the old jazz tunes of Django Reinhardt, Stefan Grappelli. And I still know it's Hank. I can hear him, and I still know it's Hank. He's got that touch. He's just got that quality to his playing. A great compliment I had actually a couple of years ago. It was my last theatre gig before COVID, and a friend of mine came to see the show for the first time up in Lincolnshire, and his little feedback, and he gave a little bit of a review on a Shadows website afterwards. And one part of it, which I really appreciated, was Justin even sounds like Hank playing acoustic.
Yeah, and I've seen that, my goodness me.
Which was, Hank's got that unmistakable, but I was so pleased to get that little compliment, because of course you're getting away from the twangy red Stratocaster with the echo on it.
That's right.
You've got an entirely different voice to provide. But even going back, to the gypsy jazz, you still know it's him, but unlike a lot of the other gypsy players around who are, playing that manouche style, they will pepper you with notes. It's an incredible technical exercise, but a lot of it will leave me quite cold because it's too many notes. Mm-hmm. It's not melodic enough. Hank strips it back. He can still play fast, but he makes it melodic, and he really takes you on a journey with it, as opposed to just going and kind of, whoa, hang on a minute, give me a moment to enjoy a note at a time. And that's what Hank's always been able to do, which is why, again, I've never really been overly interested in a lot of the very fast rock players from the kind of the 80s and 90s.
I'm exactly the same.
You need to have something to engage with as a voice.
Yeah, do you know what? I think that's the best way of explaining it I've ever heard, and that is to let me digest one note at a time. So you don't have to necessarily be fast, but if you're playing with that kind of that feeling and that way that Hank obviously does, and I to a degree I would say you as well. I know you're not going to be the same as Hank, but you have this wonderful style with your playing. Now there is one track I think I was watching you play, and where you used the Fender and the acoustic Fender. I think it must have been a acoustic Fender. Is it Sasha?
Sasha.
That was a great piece of music.
It's a lovely tune. Co-written, I think he was the lead writer, by Jerry Lorden again, as in Apache, Wonderful Land, Atlantis. It's the joke on the gig is, it was originally actually intended for a famous French singer, and Hank gives it the punchline, Edith Piaf. But it was intended, I believe, for Sacha Distel to sing, but I think the story goes, Hank used to say this, obviously it was a stage joke, but it was originally intended to be a vocal, and as the melody progressed, as they were writing it, they thought, let's just leave this as a tune. This is just good enough to give to Hank to play on guitar. And it's a love, because it's got two very distinct themes. It's great for Hank to be able to alternate. On record, he of course overdubbed, to alternate between what was at the time a classical guitar, when then he did it acoustic later on, and the Stratocaster. Well, originally it was the Burns, but acoustic and electric essentially. So in about the year 2000, I think he started using a special stand, which allowed him to keep the acoustic on an angle where he could just angle himself up over the guitar and continue to play the acoustic with the electric still strapped to his back, step away from the acoustic, whip the guitar back round and play the electric thing.
It's a good show. It's a good show.
It's a great little visual. It worked very, very well. And so thankfully I've managed to get hold of a stand like that. I'm going to play Sasha tonight.
Are you? Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you've come to Cornwall to play this gig tonight. I really am. So if you was to pick a song then, is there a song? I mean, it's too obvious to say Apache. I mean, I love Apache, but there must be other songs in the repertoire that's available to you that you kind of say, do you know what, I really play in that song? Or is it still Apache when you're there tonight and the lights are on and the audience are there and you go...
Apache has such a strength to it. Exactly. You can kind of... when you get to the middle section, it's away from the famous main theme.
Yes.
That's the strength. But then... You get to, I suppose, I call it the chorus, but you get to that middle section from the F major chord, da, 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 and it soars. It soars. And it's got this, because of course of the echo, which was very new, it gave Hank's sound a much spacier, and the Abbey Road effects help as well, but it gave it such an amount of space and grandeur Apache's wonderful for that. But to answer your question, I mean, for me, it's always going to have to be Jerry Lorden.
Okay.
Jerry Lorden could write incredible melodies. Wonderful Land is just a masterpiece.
It's a great tune as
It's
well,
a
I know.
wonderful piece. Atlantis. Hank has always said Atlantis is one of his favourites to play.
That's with the dampening on the strings on that one, isn't it?
Yeah. Wonderful Land's got that as well with the ding, ding.
That's
ding,
right,
ding.
yeah.
Then Atlantis, that lovely little kind of choppy little ding, 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 ding. It's got the way Hank played with the echo. There's so much in those tunes that you can apply, you could say is down to the songwriting, but a lot of it, of course, is down to Hank's genius of how to then interpret it.
Indeed.
I mean, and he was a young man. The thing is, we're all here copying what this guy was doing in his late teens and early 20s.
Right. Yeah.
And he thinks he's moved on. He's moved on as a guitarist. Of course, he's a much better player than he was when he was so young. But we're all stuck in our ways trying to copy what he was doing in his 20s. And he was... that's why so many of the great guitarists that followed him have always said, well, Hank was the main man. That's why that's why I became a guitarist, or he was a main influence on me being a guitarist, was because he had such a clear, distinctive style. He knew how to express melody. So when it came to people like David Gilmour, Pink Floyd, Brian May, Mark Knopfler, Peter Green, Gary Moore, all these great players, you can listen to them, and there's very much there's a Hanky sort of. You can still hear his influence.
Indeed.
On their playing. You can still hear him.
Yeah, there's some great clips, of course, with Hank playing with many of these people you've mentioned as well online and things like that. And I don't care who you are. If you've got a guitar, I mean, I've got a Fender in my house, far too good of a guitar for me to have, really, because I can't really play it that well. But, whenever people come in, my showpiece is to a certain degree, I can play a bit of Apache. Okay? Not to your standard or anything like that. But... anyone who can play guitar will come in and they're like, wow, But it's just when I play it, I'm thinking, oh, it feels so good, and it's nowhere near, of course, the stand that you play or let alone Hank. But it's just there's something about it, and that history that goes right back.
Yeah.
And I was brought up with it. My parents kind of played the Shadows and things. That's what I was kind of brought up on. And it was just that sound of very similar to you. I just remember that sound cutting through, and I thought, that's so good.
It's rich. It's because of the recording techniques at the time, being on vinyl, they couldn't record a lot of bass end, bottom end on the records because it would cause too much damage. They had to scoop a lot of it away in the post-production because of the way that otherwise I think the stylist would maybe jump on the grooves if there was too much of a bass kind of effect. So I'm talking as though I'm an expert, and I'm really not. But you hear, I mean, Jet Harris's great bass solos or bass lines and the stuff he was playing, it's kind of scooped out, it's hollow, so it's got a kind of a good, it's still got the bass thump to it, but it's not overly bassy. Live, he had a lot more bass in his sound. But why was I saying that? I've lost my...
Well, just going about the kind of recordings and things.
The sound quality, there's a richness, that middly kind of real sound quality, which gave it, as I said, kind of quite a voice, it was very much a kind of a vocal kind of quality. And that was definitely helped by the echo, lovely Miazzi echo that Hank had. And he and his sound, as I say, it was influencing all the other guitarists who were coming up. All they did necessarily, David Gilmour and Brian May, they've essentially just added distortion to the sound. They're still using echo, and they're still using a solid body guitar. I've seen David Gilmour play live, and he's incredible. But you can still hear there's so much Hank influence still in his sound. I've lost my track a little bit, forgive me.
That's okay. Well, you mentioned a name there. I wanted to bring that in anyway. So I was going to go on to some of the players within the Shadows. Now, you mentioned Jet Harris there, so I'm going to go with that because I was very, very fortunate to have a good friend called Bob Brown. And Bob Brown is a local guitarist, fantastic guitarist, and he had a connection to Jet Harris. Okay. So when I was doing a gig at the time for a children's hospice, he said, well, look, I might be able to get Jet to come down and do the gig with you. I said, no, that'd be amazing. And do you know what he did? And Jet came down.
Wonderful.
He stayed at my house. We played Move It in the early hours in the morning, and I just couldn't believe my luck.
Yeah.
A really nice guy. He played the gig. He then played a local pub as well, and the place was packed.
Yeah,
Just
of course.
because these people were timeless. Jet and people like that. Even though he was long gone out of the Shadows lineup, but in those early days, he had roast dinner at my mum's. It was quite a surreal moment.
Yeah.
Is there anyone within the Shadows that you've met? So I'm assuming you've never met Hank.
I've met Hank. It wasn't the best time.
Right.
It was after the Shadows' last ever show on their last tour in 2005, and I ended up, as quite a few Shads fans did that night, in the bar in the hotel. So everywhere you looked, there was a Shadow. It was amazing. And I'd been trying to meet him for 10 years, and that was the night I managed to shake his hand, say a few words. Then he'd just come into the hotel, into the lobby after the show. So he disappeared up to his room, and I thought that might be the last we saw of him. Then he came back down, and I was able to exchange a few more words with him. But that's the extent, if you like. Yeah. But I've been very lucky. I have been very lucky with what I've been able to do because talking about Jet, my group, not that we've played together for getting on for 9.5 years. I put my group together in 2008. We called ourselves the Shadowers. I had already by that time been very close to Brian Locking, Licorice Locking.
Yes,
I'll come on to Brian in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
I'll come on to Brian in a minute. But because of that, and because of my kind of links, and through the Shadows fan community, I'd been able to get to know Licorice, Alan Jones, who played bass for them in the 70s and 80s. Cliff Hall, and through my work that I had done previously with another very young group, they were all younger than me, called the Foot Tappers, who had a few years really in the limelight, who were incredibly talented youngsters, and I left the group. I left the Foot Tappers, formed the Shadowers. One of our first gigs in spring of 2009. We were invited to go out to the, they call it the International Fan Meeting, I think, for Cliff and the Shadows. The International Cliff and the Shadows Fan Meeting, Holland.
Yeah. Yes.
Netherlands.
There was one called the Movement International Cliff. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
It might be the same people. I don't know.
But these guys in Holland, they do the kind of one big international thing, 2-day kind of long thing every year. They do a smaller one, kind of which they call I think the national one, which is only a 1-day thing in the autumn. But anyway, on the bill, I saw Jet Harris. We're going out there at the same time. I've already played with Licorice, with Cliff Hall, with Alan, and I was just a bit cheeky. This just goes to show you don't know. You don't know what you get until you just simply ask the question. Just
Indeed.
be cheeky.
Absolutely.
So I sent an email to the organisers saying, "Is there a chance that I can ask Jet, you'll allow me to approach Jet and just say, will he come and join us to play bass on a couple of tunes on stage?" Now, that would never have happened because Jet would have been topping the bill. Looking back on it, was a bit of a silly question. But they said in the email, we need a band for him because his band had pulled out for whatever reason. I think it was the Rapiers at that point, and I've heard a couple of different reasons why they didn't travel to Holland that time. And Jet, that they said, if you want to, would you like to be Jet's band for the show?
No way.
So, all right. I couldn't immediately say yes, and thankfully it was all done via email anyway. So it wasn't as if it was a phone call and I needed to get back to them in 10 minutes. But I asked the rest of the boys. They said, "Yep, let's do it," because we had to learn Jet's. It wasn't just the Shadows material. Jet had a whole catalogue of music of his own.
Yeah, indeed.
That we would have to learn in quite a rush.
His last album was fantastic as well, San Antonio.
Oh yeah, that album was brilliant. The Journey.
That's right.
Yes, and San Antonio.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. I have to be careful about how I tell it. But, so we agreed. The one fella who really had the work to do was Matt, who's been my best friend ever since we were 4 years old. He's a very, very quiet guy, but he's an incredible pianist, and so when it came to putting my group together, there was only one man I wanted for the keyboards. And having a good keyboard player helps lift you as a group, compared to other groups who just are playing 2 guitars, bass and drums.
Sure.
If you're able to play the stuff in the same way that the Shads were doing on their tours, and you have a good keyboard player, you can do all of that stuff. You can get the orchestral sound, you can get all the great synth sounds, whatever. So Matt is fantastic, but he had to go away and learn by ear and go out and score in a rush and do everything he could to try and get, this is in the days before we were kind of really aware of MIDI files or stuff where we can maybe, even if they were available at that point for Jet's material. There's only 2009, so I expect it probably was.
Oh, for sure.
But, so we went away, learned it. We had our first rehearsal in quite an open plan pub, actually, in Oxfordshire, in Banbury. And we were sound checking, ready, having a bit of a rehearsal through some of Jet's stuff. And then there he comes with his hat. It's quite a short chap, wasn't he?
He is. Yeah, it was, yeah. Of course, yeah.
And he came in into the pub. There he is. Okay, so we helped him in with all this stuff. Right, don't mind me. I'm going to sit and just listen to you guys for a bit. You carry on.
Yeah.
And I think we played Atlantis, and we played Equinox. Part 5. Yeah. Equinox. We and Jet was watching. It was kind of a 2-tier area in this pub, so Matt was kind of stood over Jet slightly, and Jet's just sitting there, and he's watching Matt and watching his hands kind of on eye level, and I'm there still really sound checking the band before the actual rehearsal gets underway. So I'm still kind of darting around trying to change settings here and there, and as I'm doing that and changing a setting during Equinox, we're playing it, and Jet just he caught my eye as I was moving around and playing. I looked back at him, he caught my eye and just gave me this. He never used to smile widely. Well, we knew him, kind of. There are a few pictures of him over the years with a big smile, but he just gave me a little kind of crease. Gave me a little nod and a little crease of the eye. Like, yeah, that's good, mate.
Yeah.
And I was so pleased. And by the end of the rehearsal, because Jet was kind of between bands, he was working with the Rapiers less and less. He'd been working with another group, and I think he was a little bit kind of homeless, if you like, in terms of having a band to play with in a settled group. By the end of the rehearsal, we were packing up. He said, "I'm going to tell my manager about you. I want you boys for my band."
Yeah, he was from London as well.
He was. Yeah. I want you boys for my band.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a chance to work with him that many times in his last year. But yeah, we were planned to record his 50th anniversary album, which he died before we could make it.
Oh, what a shame.
But we were going to be the band for that. But working with Jet was, out of all the different members of the Shadows I've met and have played with, Jet was the one guy that I could say, propping up the bar, "Come on then, mate, let's if he had never been famous, if he'd never been a musician, a serious muso, if we were just talking, he would have been the one I would have said, "Come on, mate, let's form a band." Jet, we kind of clicked, and he had that lovely little kind of twinkle behind his eye.
Yeah, he was a very normal, approachable guy. Proper, no hairs or graces or anything. He was,
No hairs?
Hairs, you know what I mean? Hairs or graces. It's
He
one of
would
those
take
ones.
issue with that.
Yeah, he would. So what next for you, though? I mean, because we talked about all this thing with the Hank side of things, which, you're always going to get bookings for that because he has such a massive kind of legacy that he's created for himself, and hopefully more years of that to come. So you're always going to get work with that, but you're an artist in your own right. So what's your kind of plans for the future? And because I know you do other stuff as well.
When you say an artist in my own right, I mean, I'm always playing other people's music. If I had original music, Matt, my keyboard playing friend, pianist friend, he's an incredible. He can write melody, which is why I've never tried. Is because it would just be. I've grown up with that standard of those great melodies that the Shadows were playing in those early days. And if I'm going to write something, it needs to be up to scratch. It can't just be run-of-the-mill, kind of forgettable tune.
Sure.
It needs to be rich melody. And Matt and I haven't had a chance to sit down and actually kind of work together and play music together for quite a long time, which is just life getting in the way. But I'd love to have some original material to try and I'm nearly 36 now. I'm too old to kind of break it into the big time, but I'd love to have the opportunity to maybe try and do something a bit more creative. What I am doing in terms of my other music, other than the Shadows tribute and my Hank tribute, is because for people who aren't aware, I've put together a lighting production with this show, unlike anything I've ever seen on the one person circuit, whereas I can just press play on that backing track and all the lights move and change colour exactly as I've designed it.
Yeah.
I'm very, very proud of it. So what I've done is, for not all of my venues it will work for, but for some of my venues, in the show, I'm pitching them. I'm just saying, guys, would you be interested if I came back and I did you a slightly different show? I'm not Hank. I just come back as me, as Justin. You know, I'll have a bit of a beard. Look, you know, this has got to go.
What, for tonight?
Before the show, yeah. This.
Oh, right. Oh, really?
No, I don't shave properly. I just makeup goes over the stubble.
Right.
It's too coarse to shave properly for my skin to get away with it.
Right.
But can I come back as Justin and just play you a night of music from the 50s and 60s, maybe some later stuff like Dire Straits, Pink Floyd, stuff like that, with all the same level of production, all these lights. You know, would you be interested? And I'm getting some great feedback, and they're all saying, yeah. So I'm just trying to work out the venues where that is going to be possible.
Yes.
So that's kind of the next project. So it's all sorts, from a bit of early gypsy jazz, like I said, through sing-along things for the 50s and 60s, early rock and roll, and then, some nice kind of tasty guitar work. But I've got to be careful of my audience. Because one theatre I've done this show at so far, the Justin show, if you like, sounds awful, doesn't it? I'm not as conceited as I sound, folks, I promise. I misjudged it a bit, because for some places, like Social Club tonight, for example, it would probably fit. A lot of the time for my theatres, if people are coming back to see my show as opposed to the Hank show, they're used to me. They're the Shadows crowd. They're coming back because it's me and they like what I do, but they're the Shadows crowd. Sure. I made a mistake the first time I did a theatre show in my own right, because I broke into the Dire Straits and the a bit of Queen, the Brian May instrumental called Last Horizon, which I think is beautiful. The Pink Floyd, and it was not right for them. They didn't like thought, Pink Floyd, no, they didn't like it. They wanted to be just simply go back to the 50s and 60s.
Sure. Yeah.
So I've got to be careful. I've always got to think about my audience in advance. So, for example, for tonight, we've yet got to chat about it, exactly what set I'm going to play them, because I know you said just give us the theatre show, but there is the potential of them tonight wanting to get up and dance.
Sure.
If they do, I've got a version of the theatre show which has got a nice big chunk of rock and roll kind of toward the end for them to let off some steam. Yeah. So I've always, whatever it is, I've always got to think about what audience I'm playing for.
No, I totally get that. Because when I started singing many moons ago, I sang all the songs of Cliff Richard. Obviously, I don't look nothing like him, but when I sang, I sounded a little bit like him, and I got away with it that way. But the thing is, even now, even though I haven't sung professionally now for probably 15 years, people still say, oh, do you still do the Cliff stuff? Yeah. Oh, could you do a couple of Cliff numbers?
Yeah.
You know, so I've done a couple of shows. I'm doing one in New Year's Eve at Bodmin Jail.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's going to be amazing.
Fun.
So a real nice gig to come back on.
Yeah.
And even now, I've got people saying, oh, are you going to be doing some of your Cliff stuff? Crikey, I haven't sung that for so long. Yeah. You know, I can sing anything from like Robbie Williams, to Roy Orbison, anything really. Yeah. But the Cliff stuff sticks. And I like that because that's what I like anyway, so it's not a problem.
I've tried to create the distinction, which is, it's not the reason why. Like I say, I've got this... Sometimes I'll be asked to do by an agent or something, I'll be asked to do a 50-50 show. Like start doing a set of the tribute Hank stuff and then just covers for the second half. I like to be able to provide a distinction between the two shows, not just with the music, but visually as well, which is why most of the time when you go out and see me perform, unless I'm doing the Hank show, I'll have a bit of a stubble or a kind of scruffy beard. I'll be playing an old beaten up white Fender Stratocaster. I'll try to provide what I can to provide as much visual, do whatever I can to provide that visual difference. So nowadays I'm not very keen on playing the red guitars during my own show because, again, I want to be able to kind of say, well, they're for the Hank show now.
Of course. Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of, people will ask me on my smaller gigs, kind of, you the guy who plays the shadows? Can you can you play this or can you play that? And I end up playing a few shad tunes, but I don't want to kind of overkill the shads on my solo gigs.
No, of course.
Because that really is, well, you've really got to come and buy a ticket to the Hank show. Because then you'll get the full works. Because the nice thing is with this, I don't like cutting down the Hank show in terms of the production. I created that and I had a vision for it. And on a very limited budget, I've managed to put together something which I think, it stands up for itself and sets its own standard in terms of one-person shows, backing track shows. But with the general covers show, I can do it with the full lighting rig, or a kind of a half cut down lighting rig, or practically nothing at all, maybe just splash a little bit of colour up the back wall behind me. And that's, so I have to play in all sorts of different settings. I've got to think about the time it's going to take me to set up, all that sort of stuff. But I need to be able to keep a certain level of exclusivity.
I agree.
For when people are paying a ticket.
Absolutely.
Because they're paying a ticket, they come to see a show.
That's right.
If you're walking into a pub and you're seeing a guitarist just in the corner of a pub, then you're going to get just a pub show, a professional pub show, but it's not going to be what you otherwise could get.
Of course.
If you were coming, and I had a whole stage to myself for the day and I can set it up exactly the way I want. But that's why the show is what it is.
Well, you've got a stage tonight anyway, that's for sure. Well, Justin, I could talk to you for hours and hours, and we can't do that because we've got to go and get ready for tonight's gig. And not only that, Jay's coming on his day off, and I'm always aware of people's time. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Now, for those people watching this, I'll make sure I put the links on the YouTube channel anyway. But a shout out to any of your socials, your website, anywhere, for people to book you, or where do they go?
Get in touch with me on Facebook. Most of my crowd are kind of a Facebook crowd, and I've never gone in for Instagram or...
I'm the same. See, we're so similar.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. And the trumpet thing as well.
Really?
I never played the trumpet, I played the cornet, which is obviously a same family, really,
Right.
Yeah. Grade 5. Never went any further, but,
Justin Daish Music. Daish, Daish. You'll probably put that on your screen.
Indeed, we will.
Justin Daish Music, or Shadowing Hank for Facebook. And get in touch via those means, or I'm not going to tell you my phone number.
No, they'll find that if they have to. Get all the agent for that.
shadowinghank@gmail.com is for direct inquiries for the tribute show. And if you want to get in touch for any inquiries for music, then shadowinghank@gmail.com will be right. Hopefully I've got a few more years of being able to do this. And
I think you are. And in fact, to be honest, your probably busiest time is yet to come. And I don't want to say what part that will be of the journey of life. But it's an absolute pleasure to finally meet you after watching your work for quite a few years now. I've known of you. So we're super excited to have you down here in Cornwall.
It's lovely to be here.
It certainly won't be the last, I'm sure of that. But that's it. Is there anything you want to mention that I haven't brought up that you might even want to just drop into this, because the first, like I said, I was looking for little interview clips of you online. I couldn't find many.
There's not a lot. I mentioned earlier, I said I would give a quick mention for Licorice.
Yes.
Because, he was kind of the granddad I never had.
Right.
Brian was, we became very close. I met him toward the end of the Shadows final tour, the UK final tour, 2004. And I met him for the first time just at a fan event just a few nights before that last show at the London Palladium. And then I became very close with him over the years through Shadows fan meetings and through the bands, etc. He again came down and stayed with us. We did like a weekend worth of work every now and again, kind of just pubs and, kind of smaller things. And then sometimes it'd be a big show, we get the band together. But he was the granddad I never had. He was lovely. But then one of the favourite parts of the show is, and I'll say all this again on stage tonight, that one of my favourite parts of the show is Licorice used to play, if you might know, he used to play harmonica.
Harmonica, yes.
One of his signature tunes to play was Andrea Bocelli, Celine Dion, The Prayer.
Yes. Now, I've seen this. You did some magical duet with him, right?
He played it as his, like I said, this harmonica piece for years.
Yeah.
It just stole the show. He just quietened it down. It's just such a delicate, powerful, but such a delicate moment. But because it was a duet originally, he and I had talked about for quite a while, on and off, can we try and put the prayer together as a guitar harmonica duet?
Wow.
So I think I stayed with him in 2018 or 19, I forget. I went up, stayed with him for a couple of nights, and we kind of toyed around with it, tried to work out the harmonies and stuff. Then COVID hit, and then sadly in October 2020 we lost him to cancer. So we never had a chance to put the duet together that we never finalized the arrangement anyway, but we had the idea in place. And I had, because of working with Brian, I had all his backing tracks, and of course I had his the last CD he recorded the prayer.
Right, okay.
So I thought, in that case, just a bit of chopping and hacking the tracks around a little bit, it meant that I could insert Brian into the backing track to certain parts, so I could then create the duet that never happened. So I think he's going to stay with me for every Hank show, even though Hank's never played the tune to date.
Sure.
Brian's always going to stay with me, and it's a magic moment, and especially with the lighting, because I can then kind of take the focus off me, because it's not about me, it's about his harmonica sound. And it's all about showing him showing him off, and he's wonderful. It's one of the most amazing sounds you've ever heard. His harmonica sound was just, hearing it in the room when he's in front of you and you've got the big speakers, he's just playing a harmonica. It's just it was an extension of his body. It was just his soul coming through that harmonica. He was awesome.
You see, because it was only actually, I didn't even know that he was a harmonica player. I just knew of him as his moment in the Shadows as a bass player.
Yeah.
And until it was actually through you that it kind of educated me about that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then finally finding that clip. And I was like, I watched the whole thing through. I went, wow, this is amazing. Because I think you said that it was the first time you spoke on your YouTube channel.
Yes, it was. I hadn't spoken to camera before that. And I don't think I've done since, actually.
And it just kind of explained it to me. And then to be fair, that set me then on my kind of journey on YouTube, finding other clips of Brian and things like that. Yeah. And my goodness, he packed a lot of time of hits in with them in a short amount. He was only with
the Shadows,
not very long at all.
18 months.
18 months.
But he was there. They'd really climbed up. They were kind of on the crest of their fame. The summer holiday period.
That's right. And he was in the film with it.
He was in the film. So you've got kind of all that stuff. Foot Tapper, Dance On, Atlantis, Guitar Tango, and The Cliff was all the summer holiday hits. And stuff like Lucky Lips. I forget. There's loads of them.
Yeah.
There were so many great songs that Brian was on. He had a lovely, laid-back, simple bass style compared to kind of Jet's quite quirky, kind of slightly jazzy style. And then John Rostill came in afterwards, after Licorice left, and again provided a whole new flavour. And he was... Brian left the Shadows due to his religious, not being able to balance his time with his religious interests. So he left the Shads. Then he performed with them, I think, for something like a week-long engagement. I think it was Talk of the Town later in the 60s. And then kind of disappeared and he did all sorts of jobs and then performed music. And then the Shadows fan community really got together once the internet, with the kind of the revelation, with the start of the internet. Everybody kind of got together and this whole worldwide community really became established. They'd been there together, but the internet helped everybody kind of consolidate and find themselves a base, if you like. And then Bruce Welch started doing Shadowmania.
Yeah, which I've always wanted to go to, but I never. Does that still go on?
No, I was the last Shadowmania was 2013. No, 2012. Sorry, 2012.
Missed it.
But the special thing for me was that Bruce asked me and another young lad who was also on the show with his own band, as I was with the Shadowers that day. He said, "Would you play lead guitar for me?"
Wow.
And split the show between you, basically. That's kind of how the show ended up. So Daniel did kind of the first half or just over half, and then I came on and kind of finished the show. And playing with Bruce, kind of I'd thought, I've played with Licorice, I've played with Jet, Alan Jones, Cliff Hall, playing with Bruce on stage. It was just a pinch me moment. 1,000 Shadows fans out there. And you've got the man himself.
Of course.
And you do. My first tune of my section of that show was Riders in the Sky. So
that's a good little rhythm version.
Playing Riders in the Sky with Bruce and his band was like I was strapped to the front of a diesel train and I was just going with it because I'm just providing the melody on top. That rhythm section was awesome. Alan Jones as a bass player is awesome. But the whole group as a rhythm section was incredible. And so it came out, did that, but halfway through Riders in the Sky, little break, straight into the classic crossover Shadows step. 1,000 Shadows fans, Bruce playing the original Strat. You know, crossover step. It was the stuff of boyhood dreams. Of course. You know, I've kind of frustrated myself to a certain extent for not being overly professional, and I will splutter, as I have done through this interview. I'll splutter my way through life, and I'll still be a fan. Some musicians can come in and, okay, they've never worked with a certain person before, it's their hero. They could just duck to water, let's be serious. And I still allow myself to be a little bit starstruck. Sometimes it's frustrated me because it's meant I'm not taken overly seriously. But at the same time, it may help me appreciate that moment more than you could believe. It was like, I can't believe I'm here. This is.
See, that for me would be my equivalent of probably one of the Shadows for sure. I mean, I've met Jet. I know his time wasn't his prime like Bruce and Hank, but would be Cliff Richard. You know.
Yeah, of course.
And I've come so close, but so far. And it's one of these days. But I think that'll be the moment because there's only there's Cliff and the Shads, and then there for me totally different is Status Quo.
Okay.
So I met Francis Rossi.
Okay.
With my dad, and my dad's a big Quo fan, and I made it so that my dad can meet him. You know, it was like a meet and greet thing, and I was like a blabbering wreck. I couldn't just talk at all. You know,
I've been a Shadow.
I'm so mad.
I know. I would be exactly the same. I've loved the Shadows since I was 8 years old, at least. But if you said, Justin, you're going to meet Hank in a week, you'd give me a week to prepare, and I still wouldn't have a clue what to say.
No, I know.
That night I met him and exchanged a few words. It was kind of, I ended up. It was a couple of weeks before that where I had met him. I had gone up to the Scarborough Shadows Gala for the first time. They still hold it. I played for them. I did the Hank show for them this year, and they've asked me back next year. And I've done the first time I visited, somebody was wearing a pair of quite Hankish, not black rims, tortoiseshell type rims, and kind of took them off and put them on me. And the compere kind of spotted me and kind of had a laugh at it. And then when he came to kind of somewhere towards closing the show on the Sunday, he got me up wearing Joe's glasses in front just for everybody to have a good laugh. And who does he look like? And the only thing I could think of when I'm looking Hank in the eye for the first time and actually having a proper conversation with him was for some stupid reason I told him that story. They got me in these big glasses looking out at the audience. But I was like, why did you say that? Why? You could have said anything to him. Why did you have to tell him that? So again, I still would be like that.
Yeah.
The one thing which I have to kind of just carry on and ignore is that Hank has said multiple times in interviews, talking about people who are influenced by him. I was talking about all the different guitarists who have been influenced. I think it's probably because of the influence, because of the kind of the passionate following and the kind of the anorak style kind of. Kind of the way that the Shadows fans study the guitar playing, and they study the sound and they try to get everything as right as they can. And Hank has kind of said on radio, I've heard him say it on radio once, get a life. You know, talking about the Shads fans who just have got nothing better to do with their time than try to copy him or say, Hank wasn't playing that quite in the right fingering position on that last show. So, just get a life. You've got better things to do with your time. But I've heard him saying, but the good thing about when you're a good guitarist is the best guitarists will then take those tunes, they'll play those tunes, and then they'll do their own thing, and they'll start developing their own style, and they'll start creating their own personality in their playing. And I'm sure that's a little kind of underhand, look, guys, you don't just have to copy me. You can, but that's the thing, it's such playable music. And I will always love playing the Shadows stuff, and I'll always love playing other music as well. And at some point, maybe I'll come across a tune which will launch me to international stardom, and I'll be able to create my own individual guitar sound. But just there's such a pleasure about getting up in front of a crowd and just sharing a mutual love of that beautiful, simple, very often very simple music, just voiced with such a beautiful, clear guitar sound that Hank gave us so many years ago, and thankfully is still inspiring people today.
It certainly is, and you continue to inspire me. So, Justin, it's been a pleasure to catch up finally. I'm looking forward to the show tonight. My thanks, as always, to our wonderful producer here, Jay Kennett, who's come in on his day off to produce this podcast for me. So I'm very, very grateful to you, Jay. Thank you very much. Make sure you follow this man if you've got even an inkling of loving the music of the Shadows and Hank and things like that. A wonderful man. If you know anyone who's doing anything remarkable here in Cornwall, or in fact the world, send me an email, shane@cornwallchannel.co.uk. But for myself and Justin, we'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you.